The bitter wind cut through Ophelia Vance's threadbare coat as she scratched another mark into the wooden beam of the abandoned cabin, her fingers so numb she could barely grip the rusted nail she used for counting. December had swallowed the high desert landscape of southern Utah whole, transforming St. George from a dusty settlement into a frozen trap, and she had been alone in this crumbling shelter for weeks, watching her meager supplies dwindle to almost nothing. She stepped back from the wall, staring at the crude calendar she had carved into the wood, each line representing another day of survival, another day of waiting for the killing cold to break. Spring felt impossibly distant, a fever dream she could no longer quite believe in. Her stomach cramped with hunger, reminding her that the last of the dried venison had run out 3 days ago, and the handful of beans she had left would barely last another week if she rationed them carefully. The sound of hoofbeats outside made her freeze, her heart hammering against her ribs. In her weakened state, she could not afford visitors, especially not the kind that roamed these remote stretches looking for easy targets. She pressed herself against the wall beside the door, clutching the only weapon she had, a fire poker with a bent tip. "Hello in the cabin," a man's voice called out, rough but not threatening. "Saw your smoke. Just passing through, but thought you might need help." Ophelia did not answer, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She had learned the hard way that trusting strangers in the wilderness could cost you everything. "Look, I know you are scared," the voice continued. "I am going to leave some supplies by your door. Jerky, cornmeal, coffee. No strings attached. I will be moving on." She heard the heavy thud of something being set down, then the creak of leather, as the man presumably mounted his horse. But the hoofbeats did not move away. Instead, she heard him curse softly. "Damn it, Storm, not now," the man muttered. And there was a commotion outside, the sound of a horse in distress. Against her better judgment, Ophelia cracked the door open and peered out. A tall cowboy, in a heavy duster, stood beside a magnificent black stallion that was favoring its front left leg, clearly in pain. The man had his hat pushed back, revealing dark hair and a weathered face that spoke of too many years under the brutal sun. He was young, maybe late 20s, but his eyes held the kind of exhaustion that aged a person beyond their years. He looked up and saw her watching. "Sorry to intrude on your property, miss. My horse pulled up lame. I will be out of your way as soon as I can get him moving." "That leg is not taking him anywhere today," Ophelia heard herself say, her voice hoarse from disuse. "Maybe not for several days." The cowboy ran a hand over his face. "Yeah, I was afraid of that." They stared at each other across the snowy yard, two strangers caught in an impossible situation. Ophelia knew she should shut the door, let him figure out his own problems. But something in his face, a bone-deep weariness that matched her own, made her hesitate. "There is a lean-to behind the cabin," she finally said. "Not much, but it will keep your horse out of the wind." His eyes widened slightly. "That is kind of you." "I am not kind," Ophelia said flatly. "I just do not want to listen to a horse suffer all night." She shut the door before he could respond, her hands shaking. What had she just done? She had invited trouble right into her camp. But when she looked at the bundle he had left by the door, a burlap sack bulging with food, she felt tears prick her eyes. She dragged it inside and opened it with trembling fingers. Jerky, just as he had promised, along with cornmeal, coffee, dried apples, and even a small tin of lard. It was a fortune, enough to keep her alive for weeks. Through the gaps in the cabin's walls, she watched him tend to his horse, speaking to the animal in low, soothing tones as he examined the injured leg. He worked with practiced efficiency, wrapping the leg and settling the stallion in the lean-to with a blanket and what looked like the last of his grain. Then he simply stood there in the snow, staring at the darkening sky as if trying to decide what to do next. Ophelia knew she should leave him out there. It was safer. But the temperature was dropping fast, and she could see her breath even inside the cabin despite the small fire in the hearth. A night outside in these conditions could easily kill a man, even one as hardy as this cowboy appeared to be. She opened the door again. "You can sleep in here," she called out, "but you stay on that side of the room, and I stay on this side. You try anything, and I will put this poker through your skull." He turned, surprise written across his face. "I would never harm a woman, miss. You have my word. Words are cheap. Actions matter. Those are the rules if you want shelter." "Fair enough." He grabbed his saddlebags and bedroll, moving toward the cabin with a slight limp she had not noticed before. When he stepped into the firelight, she got her first good look at him. He was leaner than she had thought, his clothes hanging loose on his frame, and there was a hardness to his jaw that spoke of too many missed meals. His eyes, though, were kind, a warm brown that reminded her of the honey her mother used to harvest back in Kansas before everything fell apart. "Name is Daniel Emmett," he said, setting his belongings down on the far side of the cabin as instructed. "Most folks call me Danny, but you can call me whatever you like. Ophelia Vance. Do not call me anything at all unless necessary." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Understood, Miss Vance." They maintained an awkward silence as she used some of the cornmeal he had brought to make a simple mush, cooking it over the fire. She made enough for two without quite acknowledging what she was doing, and when she handed him a tin plate, he accepted it with a quiet thank you that held more gratitude than the simple meal warranted. "When did you last eat?" she asked, watching him force himself to eat slowly when she could see he wanted to wolf it down. "Yesterday morning, maybe the morning before. I lose track sometimes." "You gave me all your supplies. You needed them more." He met her eyes across the fire. "I have been hungry before. I will be hungry again. But you looked like you were at the end of your rope." Ophelia wanted to deny it, to maintain the fiction that she had everything under control, but she was too tired for pride. I am. How long have you been out here alone?" 5 weeks, maybe 6. I lost count somewhere around the 3rd week." Daniel let out a low whistle. "That is a hell of a long time. You are tougher than you look." "I do not feel tough. I feel like I am barely hanging on." The admission surprised her, words she had not meant to speak aloud. But something about this stranger made her want to be honest, to stop pretending she was fine when she was anything but. "What are you doing out here?" he asked gently. "This is not a place for anyone to be alone, especially not in winter." Ophelia stirred the fire, watching the flames dance. "I was traveling with a wagon train, heading to California. My husband had promised me a new life, said he had land waiting for us, work lined up. It was all lies. When we got to St. George, he cleaned out what little money we had saved and disappeared, left me in a boarding house with nothing. The landlady took pity on me for a week, then turned me out when I could not pay. I ended up here because it was empty, and I had nowhere else to go. I am sorry. Do not be. I am better off without him. I just did not expect winter to come so early and stay so hard." Daniel was quiet for a moment, then said, "I am heading north up towards Salt Lake City. Got a job waiting for me there, working security for a mining operation. Pay is supposed to be good. When my horse is healed, I could take you with me, help you get somewhere safe. I do not need charity." "It is not charity. It is common decency. Besides, you gave me shelter tonight. I am just returning the favor." Ophelia looked at him, trying to read his intentions. He met her gaze steadily, no guile in his expression. "Why are you really doing this?" "Because somebody helped me once when I needed it," Daniel said quietly. "I was 17, just lost my parents to cholera, did not have a penny to my name or any idea what I was going to do. A rancher took me in, taught me how to work cattle, gave me a chance to make something of myself. He told me to pass it on when I could. So that is what I am doing." There was truth in his words, a raw honesty that resonated with her own experiences. "I will think about it," she said finally. "That is all I am asking." They finished their meal in silence, and then Daniel spread his bedroll on the far side of the cabin as promised, using his saddle as a pillow. Ophelia wrapped herself in her own thin blankets, the fire poker within reach, and tried to sleep. But she found herself watching him in the firelight, this stranger who had appeared out of nowhere with food and kindness, who asked for nothing in return. "Why are you really traveling alone in winter?" she asked into the darkness. "Any sane person would wait for spring." His voice came back, weary but honest. "Because I ran out of money in Arizona and could not afford to wait. It was move or starve, so I moved. We are a fine pair, are not we? Both nearly starving, both running out of time." "Yeah," he agreed, "but at least we are not starving alone tonight." Something about that statement, simple and true, made Ophelia feel less afraid than she had in weeks. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, slept without nightmares. She woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Daniel moving quietly around the cabin, trying not to disturb her. Gray morning light filtered through the cracks in the walls, and she could hear the wind still howling outside, angry and relentless. "Storm has not let up," he said when he noticed she was awake. "We are not going anywhere today." Ophelia sat up, every muscle in her body protesting. "How is your horse?" "Leg is still swollen. He needs rest more than anything." Daniel handed her a tin cup of coffee. "I checked your calendar. You have been marking the days until spring." She accepted the coffee, wrapping her cold hands around the warm metal. "Yes, I figured if I could just make it to spring, I could find work, earn enough to move on. But that was before my supplies ran so low." "How many days were you counting?" 87. Now 86. Daniel sat down across from her, his own cup steaming in his hands. "Can I be honest with you, Ophelia?" The use of her first name should have annoyed her, but instead it felt right, natural. "Please. You are not going to make it to spring. Not out here, not alone." She had known this deep down, but hearing someone else say it made it real in a way it had not been before. "I know," she whispered. "I have known for a while, but I did not know what else to do. I have nowhere to go, no one to turn to. This cabin was the only option I had." "What if I made you a proposition?" "I am not that desperate," she said sharply. "Not that kind of proposition," Daniel said quickly, his ears turning red. "Hell, I am not explaining this well. What I mean is, what if we helped each other? You need food and shelter. I need someone to help me get north. These roads are dangerous for someone traveling alone. Bandits, harsh weather, 100 things that can go wrong. 2 people have a better chance than one. You want me to travel with you. As partners, we pool our resources, watch each other's backs, and when we get to Salt Lake City, we go our separate ways if that is what you want. But at least you will have made it somewhere with opportunities, somewhere you can start over." Ophelia studied him over the rim of her cup. "What do you get out of this arrangement?" "Company, safety in numbers, and maybe the chance to help someone who needs it." He paused, then added, "I have been alone a long time, Ophelia. It gets old after a while." She thought about the alternative, staying in this cabin and slowly starving, or worse, freezing to death when her firewood ran out. She thought about the marks on the wall, each one representing another day of grinding survival, of wondering if tomorrow would be the day her luck finally ran out. "All right," she said finally, "but I pull my own weight. I am not some helpless woman who needs to be taken care of. I did not think you were. And if you try anything inappropriate, partner or not, I will leave you bleeding in the snow." Daniel held up his hands. Message received loud and clear. They shook on it, his hand rough and calloused against hers, and Ophelia felt something shift inside her chest, a tiny spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, she was going to survive this after all. The storm kept them trapped in the cabin for 3 more days. During that time, they fell into an easy routine that surprised Ophelia with its natural rhythm. Daniel insisted on doing the heavy work, chopping firewood and hauling water from the half-frozen creek nearby, while she managed the cooking and kept the fire going. They talked, hesitantly at first, then with increasing openness, sharing the stories of their lives like people do when they have nothing left to lose. Daniel told her about growing up on a small ranch in Texas, about parents who loved him fiercely but could not quite make ends meet. He spoke of the cholera epidemic that swept through their town when he was 17, taking both his mother and father within days of each other, leaving him orphaned and alone. He described the rancher who took him in, a gruff man named Samuel, who taught him everything about horses and cattle and surviving in a harsh land. Samuel died 2 years ago, Daniel said quietly, staring into the fire. Hart just gave out one day while he was mending a fence. He left me a small inheritance, enough to get by for a while, but I spent most of it paying off debts he had not told anyone about. Did not want his name to be ruined after he was gone. By the time I was done, I had just enough left to buy Storm and head north looking for work. That was honorable of you, Ophelia said. Maybe. Or maybe it was stupid. I have been asking myself that question for months now. She understood the sentiment all too well. I have made my share of stupid decisions too. Marrying Thomas was probably the worst of them. Tell me about him. Ophelia sighed, gathering her thoughts. He was charming. I will give him that. Swept into Kansas City with big promises and bigger dreams. Said he was a businessman, had investments out west, just needed a good woman by his side to build a life with. I was 22, working in a dress shop and living in a boarding house that smelled like cabbage and defeat. My parents had died the year before, fever, and I had no siblings, no family at all. Thomas represented escape, a chance at something better. So I believed him. When did you realize it was all lies? Somewhere around Nevada, when I noticed that every town we stopped in, he would disappear for hours, come back with less money than we started with. He gambled, though he never admitted it. By the time we reached St. George, we were broke. I thought maybe it would be different here, that he would finally stop running and start building the life he had promised. Instead, he took the last of our money and vanished. I have not seen him since. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. You deserve better than that. Maybe, but wanting better and getting better are two different things. Not always. Sometimes you get a second chance. She met his eyes across the fire. Is that what this is? A second chance? For both of us, I hope. On the fourth day, the storm finally broke, leaving behind a world transformed by snow and ice. Daniel checked on Storm and declared the horse's leg much improved, well enough for slow travel if they took their time. They spent the morning packing what little Ophelia had, which fit easily into one small bundle, and preparing for the journey north. Before they left, Ophelia stood in front of her calendar one last time, staring at the marks she had carved with such desperate hope. She picked up her rusted nail and scratched a new message beneath the counting marks, something for whoever found this place next. I made it. I survived. Keep going. Daniel watched her from the doorway. Ready? As I will ever be. They set out into the frozen landscape, Daniel leading Storm carefully, while Ophelia walked beside him. The going was slow, treacherous with ice and hidden obstacles beneath the snow, but for the first time in weeks, Ophelia felt something other than despair. She felt possibility. They made camp that first night in a small grove of juniper trees, sheltered from the wind. Daniel proved himself skilled at making a fire, even with damp wood, and they shared a meal of jerky and beans while the stars wheeled overhead, brilliant and cold. How long do you think it will take us to reach Salt Lake City? Ophelia asked, huddled close to the fire. In good weather, with a healthy horse, maybe 2 weeks. The way we are going now, probably closer to 3, maybe 4. We will have to stop in towns along the way, see if we can pick up supplies and work. I have some skills. I can sew, cook, do laundry. Most towns need someone who can do those things. And I can work with horses, cattle, general labor. Between us, we should be able to scrape by. They fell silent, listening to the crackle of the fire and the distant howl of a coyote. Ophelia found herself studying Daniel's profile in the firelight, the strong line of his jaw, the way his eyes reflected the flames. He was handsome in a rough, unpolished way, and there was a gentleness to him that contradicted his weathered exterior. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said. "Sure. Have you ever been in love?" Daniel turned to look at her, surprise evident in his expression. "Once, a long time ago. Girl named Sarah back in Texas. We were planning to get married, had the whole thing figured out. But then my parents died, and I had nothing to offer her. No land, no money, no prospects. Her father convinced her to marry someone else, a banker's son with a future. I cannot blame her. She made the practical choice. Do you still think about her?" "Sometimes, but mostly I think about how young we both were, how little we really knew about anything. I am not sure what we had was really love, or just the idea of it." He paused. "What about you? Did you love Thomas?" Ophelia considered the question carefully. "I thought I did at the time, but looking back, I think I was in love with what he represented, not who he actually was. I wanted to be saved, and he seemed like a savior. It was only after we married that I realized he needed saving more than I did, and I could not fix him. You should not have to fix anyone. You should just get to be yourself. That is a nice idea. It is more than an idea. It is how things should be." They held each other's gaze for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them, a recognition of shared pain and shared hope. Then Ophelia looked away, suddenly self-conscious. "We should sleep. Tomorrow will be another long day." "Yeah," Daniel agreed, but his voice held a note of reluctance, as if he wanted to keep talking, keep this moment going. But he settled into his bedroll without protest, and Ophelia did the same, wrapping herself in the blankets he had insisted she take the better ones. She lay awake for a long time, listening to his breathing, even out into sleep, and wondered what she was getting herself into. Not the journey north, that made practical sense, but the way her heart had skipped when he looked at her across the fire, the warmth that had nothing to do with the flames, that was dangerous territory. She had been burned once by trusting too quickly, by believing in promises that turned out to be empty. She could not afford to make that mistake again. But as she finally drifted off to sleep, she could not quite shake the feeling that Daniel Emmett was different, that maybe, just maybe, he was exactly what he appeared to be, a good man trying to do right in a hard world. They reached the small town of Cedar City after 5 days of slow, careful travel. It was a modest settlement, built around a fort that had seen better days, but it had a general store, a blacksmith, and a boarding house that looked reasonably clean. Daniel paid for a room for Ophelia with the last of his spare coins, insisting she needed a real bed and a hot bath after days on the trail. "What about you?" she asked. "I will bed down in the stable with Storm. I have done it before. Besides, it would not be proper for us to share a room, and I cannot afford two." She wanted to argue, to say that propriety meant little when you were broke and freezing, but she also appreciated his consideration. So she accepted the room and spent the evening washing away days of trail dirt, mending her clothes, and trying not to think about how much she already missed Daniel's company. The next morning, they met in the town square to discuss their next move. Daniel had spoken with the blacksmith and learned there was a ranch about 10 miles north that needed temporary hands for the winter. The pay was not much, but it included room and board, and they could stay there until spring if they wanted. "It would give us a chance to save up some money," Daniel explained. "Make the rest of the journey easier. What do you think?" Ophelia considered it. The idea of staying in one place for a while, of not constantly moving and struggling, was enormously appealing, but it also meant delaying her plans, extending her time with Daniel. She was not sure if that was a good thing or a dangerous one. "What kind of work would they want from me?" she asked. "Cooking, cleaning, mending." The foreman's wife needs help with the household. She is expecting a baby in the spring and has been having a hard time keeping up. I can do that. So we try it? She nodded. We try it. The ranch belonged to a man named Robert Thornton, a former cavalry officer who had settled in Utah after his service ended. He was a stern man with gray streaking his beard, but his eyes were kind when he looked at his wife, Margaret, a small woman with a swollen belly and tired eyes. Margaret practically wept with relief when Ophelia offered to help with the cooking and cleaning. I have been trying to keep up, but everything exhausts me these days, she admitted. Robert hired extra hands for the winter work, but none of them know the first thing about running a household. I will take care of it, Ophelia assured her. You just focus on staying healthy for that baby. Daniel was assigned to work with the cattle, helping to feed and care for the herd through the winter months. It was hard, cold work, but he took to it with the same quiet competence he brought to everything else. Ophelia watched him from the kitchen window sometimes, admiring the easy way he moved among the animals, the patience he showed even when the cold made everything twice as difficult. They settled into a routine over the following weeks. Ophelia rose before dawn to start breakfast for the household, cooking for Margaret and Robert and the 6 ranch hands who lived in the bunkhouse. She spent her days cleaning, mending, helping Margaret with whatever needed doing. In the evenings, after the dinner dishes were washed and put away, she would sit by the fire and work on sewing projects, sometimes joined by Margaret, who was eager for female company. Daniel usually showed up after dinner, ostensibly to report to Robert about the day's work, but Ophelia noticed he always found an excuse to linger, to catch her eye and exchange a few words. Sometimes, if the weather was not too bitter, they would walk together around the ranch yard, their breath fogging in the cold air as they talked about everything and nothing. You seem happier, Daniel observed one evening as they walked. More settled. I am. It is strange, but this feels more like a home than anywhere I have lived in years. Even that cabin felt more like a prison than a home. Margaret really relies on you, and I rely on her in a way. It is nice to feel useful, to know that what I am doing matters. It matters to me too, Daniel said quietly. What you do, who you are, it all matters. Ophelia felt her cheeks flush, and not from the cold. Daniel, I know we agreed to be partners to help each other get north, but I need you to know that somewhere along the way, it became more than that for me. You became more than that. Her heart was hammering now, a mix of fear and hope warring in her chest. We barely know each other. I know you count the days when you are scared. I know you put others before yourself even when you have nothing to give. I know you are stronger than you believe and kinder than you pretend to be. I know you take your coffee black and you hum when you think no one is listening, and you have a scar on your left hand from a kitchen accident when you were 12. He stopped walking and turned to face her. I know enough to know that I am falling in love with you, Ophelia Vance, and I needed to tell you that, even if you do not feel the same way. She stared at him, her mind reeling. Everything in her screamed to be cautious, to protect herself, to remember what had happened the last time she trusted a man's promises. But when she looked into Daniel's eyes, she saw only honesty, vulnerability, and a tenderness that made her chest ache. I am scared, she whispered. I know. So am I. I do not know if I can trust this. Trust you. Trust myself. You do not have to know right now. I am not asking you to make any promises or decisions. I just needed you to know how I feel. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently took her hand. We can take this as slow as you need, or not at all, if that is what you want. But I will not lie to you or hide how I feel. You deserve honesty, at the very least. Ophelia looked down at their joined hands, his rough and calloused, hers smaller, but no less marked by hard work. I think I might be falling in love with you too, she admitted, the words barely audible. And that terrifies me more than anything. Why? Because I have been hurt before. Because I do not want to be wrong again. Because if this does not work out, I do not know if I will survive it. Daniel squeezed her hand gently. I cannot promise we will not hurt each other sometimes. People do, even when they love each other. But I can promise I will never lie to you, never abandon you, never make you feel like you are less than you are. And I can promise that whatever happens, we will face it together. She looked up at him, searching his face for any hint of deception, but found only sincerity. Slowly, carefully, she leaned forward and rested her forehead against his chest, feeling his arms come around her, warm and solid and real. Okay, she breathed. Okay. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the cold darkness, and Ophelia felt something inside her begin to heal. A wound she had not even realized was still bleeding, finally starting to close. The winter passed more quickly after that. Ophelia and Daniel did not hide their growing affection from the others at the ranch, though they remained respectful and appropriate in their behavior. Robert and Margaret watched their courtship with approval, happy to see two young people finding something good in a hard world. Margaret confided in Ophelia one afternoon, while they were kneading bread together. I can see how much you care for each other. It reminds me of when Robert and I were courting. Were you scared? Ophelia asked. When you realized you loved him? Terrified. I had seen too many women marry the wrong man, end up trapped and miserable. But Robert was different. He showed me through his actions, not just his words, that he was someone I could trust. Margaret paused, her hands stilling in the dough. Has Daniel shown you that? Ophelia thought about all the small things Daniel had done over the past weeks. The way he always made sure she had enough to eat before serving himself. The way he fixed the latch on her door without being asked. The way he listened when she talked. Really listened, as if her words mattered more than anything else in the world. Yes, she said softly. He has. Then hold on to that. Good men are rare, and when you find one, you do not let go. In February, Margaret went into labor 2 weeks earlier than expected. It was a long, difficult birth that lasted through the night and into the next day. Ophelia stayed by her side the entire time, helping the midwife, offering water and cool cloths, holding Margaret's hand through the worst of the pain. When the baby finally came, a healthy boy with his father's strong lungs and his mother's dark hair, Margaret wept with relief and exhaustion. Thank you, she whispered to Ophelia. I could not have done it without you. You did all the hard work, Ophelia said, but she felt a surge of pride and joy at being part of this moment, at helping to bring new life into the world. Robert was beside himself with happiness, cradling his son with trembling hands and thanking everyone within earshot. He gave all the ranch hands a bonus that week and threw a celebration dinner that lasted well into the night. Daniel found Ophelia outside after the celebration, standing in the ranch yard and looking up at the stars. Quite a day, he said, coming to stand beside her. Quite a day, she agreed. It makes you think, does not it? About life and what matters and what we are all doing here. What are you thinking about? About how a few months ago, I was alone in that cabin, counting the days, and not sure I would make it to spring. And now I am here, watching new life come into the world, feeling like maybe I have a future after all. She turned to look at him. You gave me that, Daniel. You and your ridiculous kindness and your stubborn insistence on helping me even when I did not want to be helped. You gave yourself that. I just provided a little support along the way. It was more than a little. She reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. I love you. I should have said it before, but I was too scared. But I am saying it now. I love you, Daniel Emmett, and I want to see where this goes. The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise, bright and warm and full of promise. I love you too, Ophelia, more than I knew it was possible to love someone. He kissed her then, gentle and sweet, and Ophelia felt the last of her walls come down, the last of her fear dissolve into the night air. She was taking a risk, opening herself up to possible hurt, but she was also opening herself up to possible joy, and after so much darkness, she was ready for the light. When spring finally arrived, melting the snow and coaxing green shoots from the thawed ground, Robert offered them both permanent positions at the ranch. "You two are the best workers I have ever had," he said. "Margaret loves having you around, Ophelia. And Daniel, you have a gift with the animals. Stay on, build a life here. I will pay you fair wages, and when you are ready, I will help you buy land of your own nearby." It was a generous offer, everything they could have hoped for, but Ophelia and Daniel asked for time to discuss it, walking out to the spot where they had first confessed their feelings to each other. "What do you think?" Daniel asked. "I think it is a good offer. Robert and Margaret are good people, and this ranch feels like home in a way nowhere else ever has." "But," Ophelia smiled. "No but. I was just waiting to hear what you thought. I think anywhere is home if you are there, but I also think this place is special, that we could build something real here, if that is what you want." "It is. But first I want to do something else." "What is that?" She took a deep breath. "I want to marry you. Not because it is practical or expected, but because I love you and I want to spend my life with you, if you will have me." Daniel stared at her for a long moment, then let out a laugh of pure joy. "Ophelia Vance, are you proposing to me?" "I suppose I am. Is that all right?" "It is more than all right. It is perfect." He swept her up in his arms, spinning her around until they were both dizzy and laughing. "Yes, 1,000 times. Yes." They were married in April, on a warm day when the whole valley seemed to be bursting with new life. Margaret helped Ophelia make a dress from fabric Robert had ordered special from Salt Lake City, a simple but beautiful design in pale blue. Daniel wore his best clothes, cleaned and pressed, his hair neatly combed for once. The ceremony was held at the ranch, with Robert officiating, since he was a retired military officer with the authority to perform marriages. Margaret stood as Ophelia's witness, holding baby James, and dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. The ranch hands served as Daniel's groomsmen, cleaned up and presentable in a way that made them almost unrecognizable. When Daniel slipped a simple gold band onto Ophelia's finger, a ring he had worked extra hours to afford, she felt tears slip down her cheeks. Not tears of sadness or fear, but tears of gratitude, of wonder that her life had led her to this moment, to this man, to this new beginning. "I do not deserve you," she whispered during the ceremony. "Yes, you do," Daniel whispered back. "And I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure you believe that." They held a celebration that lasted well into the night, with music and dancing and more food than seemed possible. Ophelia found herself surrounded by people who cared about her, who had welcomed her into their lives and their hearts, and she realized with a start that she had a family again, not by blood, but by choice. That night, in the small cabin Robert had given them as a wedding present, Daniel and Ophelia lay together as husband and wife for the first time. He was gentle with her, patient and kind, and when she cried afterward, he held her and asked what was wrong. "Nothing is wrong," she said through her tears. "Everything is right. That is what is so overwhelming. I am happy, Daniel. Truly, genuinely happy. And I do not think I have felt that way in so long I almost forgot what it was like." "Get used to it," he murmured against her hair, "because I plan to make you this happy every day for the rest of our lives." The years that followed were not always easy, but they were good. Ophelia and Daniel worked alongside Robert and Margaret, helping the ranch prosper and grow. They saved their money carefully, and within 3 years, they had bought a parcel of land adjacent to the Thornton property, building a modest house with their own hands and the help of friends. Ophelia gave birth to their first child in the summer of 1878, a boy they named Samuel, after the rancher who had saved Daniel all those years ago. He was a healthy, loud baby, with Daniel's brown eyes and Ophelia's stubborn determination. Daniel wept the first time he held his son, overwhelmed by the responsibility and the love and the sheer miracle of it all. We made this, he said in wonder. We made a person. We did, Ophelia agreed, exhausted but radiant. And we are going to raise him right, teach him to be kind and strong and true, like his mother, like his father. 2 years later, they had a daughter they named Margaret, after the woman who had become like a sister to Ophelia. She was a quieter baby than Samuel had been, with serious eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. Samuel was immediately protective of his little sister, and Ophelia and Daniel often found him sneaking into her room to check on her when he thought they were not watching. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch prospered, and their own small holding grew steadily. They raised cattle and horses, keeping some and selling others, building a reputation for quality stock and fair dealing. Ophelia maintained a large garden, preserving food for the winter and selling her surplus in town. She also took in sewing work, her skill with a needle becoming locally famous. Daniel proved to have a gift for training horses, and people came from miles around to have him work with their difficult animals. He was patient and firm, never cruel, and seemed to have an instinct for what each horse needed. He taught Samuel his techniques, and the boy showed every sign of inheriting his father's talent. They faced challenges, of course. There were droughts that tested their resources, winters that seemed to go on forever, illnesses that swept through the valley. But they faced everything together, supporting each other through the hard times and celebrating the good ones. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Daniel took Ophelia back to the old cabin where he had first found her, counting the days until spring. The structure had deteriorated further, the roof partially collapsed, the walls sagging, but her calendar was still there, the marks she had carved still visible in the wood. "Do you remember what you told me that day?" Daniel asked, standing beside her as they looked at the desperate counting marks. "When I first arrived, I said a lot of things that day, most of them unfriendly. You said you did not know if you would make it. That spring seemed too far away." Ophelia nodded, remembering the desperation, the bone-deep exhaustion, the certainty that she was living her last days. "I really did not think I would make it. I had given up hope, Daniel, if you had not come along when you did." "But I did, and you did make it. You made it through that winter and every winter since. You are the strongest person I know, Ophelia." She leaned against him, solid and warm beside her. "I am only strong because you give me strength. We give each other strength. That is how it is supposed to work." They carved new marks into the wood, just below her old calendar. Their initials intertwined, the date of their wedding, the names of their children. A record that something good had grown from that desperate winter, that hope had prevailed over despair. As they rode back to their ranch, with their children waiting at home with Margaret and Robert, Ophelia reflected on how much her life had changed. She had gone from counting days in desperation to counting blessings in gratitude. She had gone from being alone and scared to being loved and secure. She had gone from surviving to living, and it made all the difference. "What are you thinking about?" Daniel asked, riding beside her with practiced ease. "About how lucky I am, about how close I came to losing everything, and how you saved me." "We saved each other," he corrected gently. "You gave me a reason to be better, to want more from life than just getting by. You gave me a home and a family and a purpose. That is not saving. That is partnership." "Partnership," Ophelia repeated, liking the sound of it. "Yes, that is exactly what we have." The sun was setting as they rode up to their house, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. Samuel came running out to greet them, followed more slowly by little Margaret, who was still uncertain on her feet. Behind them, smoke rose from the chimney, promising warmth and comfort and all the small rituals of home. Daniel helped Ophelia down from her horse, and they stood for a moment, watching their children play in the yard, listening to the sounds of evening settling over the valley. It was a simple scene, unremarkable in many ways, but to Ophelia it was everything. "I love you," she said, not for the first time and not for the last. "I love you too," Daniel replied, pulling her close. Today, tomorrow, and all the days after that, they walked into their house together, their children following, and Ophelia thought about the woman she had been in that cabin, scratching marks into wood and praying for spring. If she could go back and tell that woman what was waiting for her, that just beyond the worst winter of her life was the best spring she could imagine, she wondered if that woman would believe her. Probably not. That woman had been too broken, too tired, too afraid to believe in happy endings. But she had held on anyway, had survived against all odds, and in surviving had found something she had never expected: a love that healed, a partner who stayed, a life worth living. The years continued to pass, marked not by desperate scratches on wood, but by the growth of their children, the expansion of their ranch, the deepening of their love. Samuel grew into a fine young man, tall and capable like his father, with a gift for horses that exceeded even Daniel's considerable skill. Margaret became a beautiful, intelligent young woman who helped her mother run the household and showed a talent for numbers that made her invaluable in managing the ranch's finances. In 1885, they had another child, a surprise baby that arrived when Ophelia thought her childbearing years were behind her. They named her Grace because she felt like a gift they had not expected but were grateful to receive. Samuel and Margaret doted on their baby sister, and Grace grew up surrounded by love and attention. Robert and the first Margaret remained close friends and neighbors, their own family growing to include 3 more children after James. The two families celebrated holidays together, helped each other through crises, and built a community that extended far beyond blood relations. Daniel's reputation as a horseman continued to grow, and by the late 1880s, people were traveling from as far as California and Colorado to have him train their animals. He could have charged far more than he did, but he believed in fair prices and honest work, principles he passed on to Samuel. Ophelia's sewing business also expanded beyond anything she had imagined. She employed 2 local women to help with the work, teaching them advanced techniques and paying them fair wages. She became known for her wedding dresses in particular, creating beautiful gowns that young brides saved for years to afford. They prospered, but they never forgot where they had come from. Every winter, they made a point of checking on travelers passing through the area, offering shelter and food to anyone who needed it. They kept the old cabin maintained as best they could, leaving supplies inside for anyone who might need emergency shelter, paying forward the kindness that had saved Ophelia's life. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Daniel presented Ophelia with a gift that made her cry. It was a small wooden box, beautifully carved, with her calendar marks from the old cabin reproduced on the lid. Inside was a letter he had written to her, expressing everything she meant to him, everything they had built together, everything he hoped for their future. "So you never forget," he said as she read through tears, "that you are the strongest person I know, that you survived when you did not think you could, that you took a chance on love when you had every reason not to, that you made me the happiest man alive." "How could I forget?" she asked, clutching the box to her chest. "You remind me every day just by being who you are. I plan to keep reminding you for the next 50 years or so." "You better." They kept that promise to each other, building a life that was rich not in material wealth, though they were comfortable, but in love and family and purpose. They watched their children grow and start families of their own. Samuel married a rancher's daughter from Cedar City, a strong, capable woman named Elizabeth, who fit seamlessly into their family. They gave Ophelia and Daniel 4 grandchildren, who brought chaos and joy in equal measure. Margaret married later, choosing carefully, and eventually settled on a schoolteacher named Thomas, which gave Ophelia a moment of pause until she met the kind, gentle man who was nothing like her first husband except in name. They had 2 children and lived in town, where Margaret helped her husband run the school and manage the town's small library. Grace, the surprise blessing, showed an early interest in medicine and healing. She apprenticed with the local doctor and eventually became a midwife, carrying on the tradition of helping bring new life into the world, just as she had been brought into it. In 1895, on a warm spring day, much like the one they had married on, Ophelia and Daniel celebrated their 20th anniversary surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and friends. Robert, now silver-haired but still strong, stood to give a toast. 20 years ago, I hired two drifters who needed work and a place to stay for the winter. I got the best workers I ever had, and more than that, I got family. Ophelia, Daniel, you have built something remarkable here. A marriage based on love and respect. A family that knows how to support each other. A legacy that will continue for generations. You should be proud. We are, Daniel said, his arm around Ophelia's shoulders. But mostly we are grateful for the chances we were given, for the people who helped us, for each other. Ophelia stood, emotion making her voice shake slightly. I want to say something too, if I may. 20 years ago, I was alone in a falling down cabin, convinced I was going to die. I had given up hope, given up fighting, given up believing that anything good could ever happen to me again. And then this man showed up with food and kindness and refused to leave me to face the winter alone. He saved my life, and then he gave me a reason to live it. Daniel, I love you more today than I did the day we married, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. Thank you for finding me. Thank you for staying. Thank you for every single day we have had together. There was not a dry eye in the room by the time she finished, and Daniel pulled her close, kissing her forehead. Thank you for letting me stay, he whispered. Thank you for taking a chance on us. The party continued long into the night, with music and dancing and storytelling. Ophelia found herself watching her family, the life she and Daniel had created, and felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. She had survived that terrible winter all those years ago, had made it through to spring and beyond, and everything she had now was because she had held on just a little bit longer, had trusted just a little bit more, had believed that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Ophelia and Daniel walked out to their porch, looking out over their land. The stars were brilliant overhead. The air was sweet with the smell of spring blossoms, and in the distance they could hear their grandchildren playing before bed. Do you ever think about what would have happened if I had not stopped at that cabin? Daniel asked quietly. Sometimes, but not in a sad way, more in a grateful way, because of all the things that had to align perfectly for us to find each other. If your horse had not pulled up lame, if the storm had not trapped us together, if I had not been desperate enough to accept your help, so many things could have gone differently. But they did not. We found each other exactly when we needed to. We did! Ophelia leaned her head on his shoulder, comfortable and content. And I would do it all again, every hard moment, every scary decision, just to end up here with you. No regrets? Not a single one. They stood like that for a long time, two people who had found each other in the darkest moment and had chosen to build something beautiful together. The wind whispered through the valley, carrying the promise of another spring, another year, another chapter in their ongoing story. Inside, their family was settling in for the night, their children and grandchildren filling the house with warmth and noise and life. It was everything Ophelia had never dared to hope for during that long winter when she had counted days instead of blessings. She thought about the message she had carved into the cabin wall before leaving. I made it. I survived. Keep going. It had been meant for some future traveler who might need hope, but really it had been a message to herself, a reminder that she was stronger than she knew, that survival was possible, that spring always followed winter no matter how long the darkness lasted. And she had made it. Not just survived, but thrived, built a life full of love and meaning and joy. She had found her spring, and it had been more beautiful than she could have ever imagined. Daniel squeezed her hand gently. What are you thinking about? About counting days? About how I used to count down to spring, just trying to survive until the weather changed. And now I count up, every day with you another blessing, another gift I do not take for granted. We have been blessed, Daniel agreed, But we also worked hard, chose each other every day, built this life with our own hands. That is true. It was not just luck or fate or divine intervention. It was us choosing to stay, choosing to try, choosing to love each other, even when it was scary. Especially when it was scary. They went inside eventually, banking the fire and checking on the grandchildren who were sleeping in various corners of the house. They climbed into their bed, the same one they had shared for nearly 20 years, and lay together in the darkness, Daniel's arm around Ophelia's waist, her head on his chest. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what?" "For everything. For stopping at that cabin. For staying when you could have left. For loving me when I was too scared to love you back. For building this life with me. For giving me a reason to keep counting days. You do not have to thank me for any of that. Loving you has been the easiest, best decision I ever made." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, secure in the knowledge that whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together, just as they had faced every day since that cold winter when a cowboy found a woman counting the days until spring, and they had decided to count the rest of their days together. The years continued their steady march forward. Daniel and Ophelia grew older, their hair turning gray, their bodies showing the wear of decades of hard work. But their love remained strong, deepening with time rather than fading. They became the elders of their community, the couple other people looked to for advice on marriage, on raising children, on building a life that mattered. They eventually turned the day-to-day running of the ranch over to Samuel and Elizabeth, moving into a smaller house on the property where they could still be involved but not burdened with the physical demands of running a large operation. Daniel still worked with horses, unable to fully retire from the work he loved, but at a gentler pace. Ophelia still sewed, though mostly special projects now, wedding dresses and christening gowns and memorial quilts. On their 30th anniversary, their entire family gathered again, now including great-grandchildren who ran underfoot and filled the air with laughter. It was a massive celebration that spilled out from the house into the yard, with tables laden with food and children playing games and adults swapping stories. Samuel stood to give a toast. His own children gathered around him. "My parents taught me that love is not just a feeling, but a choice you make every day. They taught me that hard work and integrity matter. They taught me that family is not just blood, but the people you choose to stand beside. Dad, Mom, thank you for showing all of us how to live a good life. We love you." Margaret added her own words, talking about her mother's strength and her father's kindness, and how they had created a home where everyone felt welcomed and valued. Grace spoke about watching her parents age together, still holding hands, still making each other laugh, still choosing each other after all these years. When it was their turn to speak, Ophelia and Daniel stood together, his arm supporting her as arthritis had made standing for long periods difficult. "30 years ago," Ophelia said, her voice still strong despite her age, "I was ready to give up. I had lost everything, had no hope for the future, could not see any way forward. And then Daniel appeared, refusing to let me face the winter alone. He gave me hope when I had none, strength when I was weak, love when I thought I was unlovable. Everything good in my life, everything that matters came from that one moment when he chose to stop and help someone who needed it. I tell you all this not to embarrass him, but to remind you that small acts of kindness can change everything, that choosing love, even when it is scary, is always worth it, that surviving the winter is possible if you do not have to do it alone." Daniel held her tighter, his own eyes bright with tears. "I found Ophelia when we were both at our lowest points, both struggling, both unsure if we would make it. But together, we not only survived, but built something beautiful. This family, this legacy. It is all because we chose each other, and I would choose her again every single time. She is my partner, my best friend, my greatest love. Everything I am, everything we have created together, it all started with a simple choice to help someone who needed it. And that choice gave me everything." The celebration continued deep into the night, But eventually, as the stars came out and the children were carried off to bed, Ophelia and Daniel found themselves alone on their porch again, watching the familiar landscape bathed in moonlight. 30 years, Ophelia mused. It feels like both forever and no time at all. I know what you mean. Sometimes I look at you and still see the woman I found in that cabin, fierce and scared and determined. Other times, I see all the years written on your face, all the life we have lived together. Which do you prefer? Both. All of it. Every version of you has been the love of my life. Ophelia smiled, reaching for his hand and intertwining their fingers. We made it, Daniel. We really, truly made it. We did, and we will keep making it as long as we have. They sat in comfortable silence, two people who had spent 30 years learning each other's rhythms, who could communicate as much through silence as through words. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain, and Ophelia closed her eyes, committing this moment to memory along with all the others she had collected over the years. When they finally went inside, moving slowly but steadily, they paused at the mantel where Ophelia kept the wooden box Daniel had given her on their 10th anniversary. She opened it carefully, reading the letter inside even though she had it memorized, then added a new note of her own. 30 years since the cowboy found me counting days until spring. 30 years of choosing love, choosing each other, choosing to build something beautiful from almost nothing. I would do it all again. I would count every day, survive every winter, face every fear, just to have this life with him. We made it. We keep making it, and it is more than I ever dreamed possible. She closed the box and placed it back on the mantel, then took Daniel's hand and led him to their bedroom. They had built a life worth living, a love worth having, a legacy worth leaving. And it had all started with a desperate woman counting days and a kind man who refused to let her face the winter alone. They fell asleep, wrapped in each other's arms, grateful for another day together, another night of shared warmth, another morning to wake up and choose each other all over again. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead, marking the passage of time, and in the distance, spring was already beginning its slow journey toward them, just as it always did, just as it always would. The story could have ended there, with 30 years of happiness and a family gathered in celebration. But life continued, as it always does, bringing both joys and sorrows in its wake. Daniel lived to see his 75th birthday, a milestone he celebrated, surrounded by 4 generations of family. But his health had been declining, his body finally giving out after decades of hard work. He passed peacefully in his sleep one autumn night, Ophelia beside him as she had been for 37 years of marriage. The loss nearly broke her. She had known it was coming, had seen him growing weaker, but nothing prepared her for the reality of waking up alone, of facing a world without her partner, her love, her reason for so many years. But she did not break. She bent, grieved deeply, and then found a way to keep going, just as she had learned to do in that cabin so many years ago. Her children and grandchildren surrounded her with love and support, and she found purpose in continuing the work she and Daniel had started, in passing on their stories and their values to the younger generations. She lived another 8 years after Daniel's death, long enough to see all her grandchildren grown and settled, long enough to hold her first great-great-grandchild, a boy named Daniel, in honor of the cowboy who had changed so many lives by choosing kindness over indifference. On a spring morning in 1910, 70 years old and ready to rest, Ophelia Emmett passed away in the same house she and Daniel had built together. Her family gathered around her bed, holding her hands and telling her they loved her, that it was all right to go, that Daniel was waiting for her. Her last words were, "I made it. I survived. And it was worth every moment." They buried her beside Daniel on a hill overlooking their ranch, with a view of the valley they had called home for so many years. The headstone was simple but meaningful, carved with their names, their dates, and a single line that summed up their entire story. They found each other in winter and built a spring that lasted a lifetime. The ranch continued for generations, run by their descendants who never forgot the story of how it all began. The old cabin where Daniel found Ophelia eventually collapsed completely, but the family maintained a marker there, a reminder of the place where their story started. Young couples in love would visit it, adding their own marks to the wood, making their own promises to survive the winters together. Samuel told his children and grandchildren about the day his father had ridden into their lives, about the woman his mother had been, both broken and fierce. He told them about love that chose to stay when it would have been easier to leave, about partnership that made both people stronger, about building something lasting from almost nothing. Margaret wrote down the stories, preserving them for future generations, ensuring that Ophelia and Daniel's legacy would not be lost to time. Her book became a family treasure passed down through the years, a reminder of where they came from and what they valued. Grace, who had learned healing from her mother's strength and her father's gentleness, continued their tradition of helping travelers in need, of offering shelter and kindness to anyone who needed it, of paying forward the gift that had saved her mother's life all those years ago. The story of the cowboy who found a woman counting the days until spring became legend in southern Utah, told and retold, embellished and simplified, but always carrying the same essential truth that kindness matters, that love is a choice worth making, that surviving the darkest winters is possible when you do not have to do it alone. And on cold winter nights, when the wind howled through the valley and spring seemed impossibly far away, parents would tell their children the story of Ophelia and Daniel, of how they found each other when both were at their lowest, of how they chose to build something beautiful together, of how they survived and thrived and loved until their last breaths. Remember, they would say, tucking their children into warm beds, safe and loved. Winter always ends. Spring always comes. And sometimes, when you think you cannot take another step, someone appears to help carry you through. Be that person for others. Choose kindness, choose love, choose to stay when it would be easier to leave. That is how you build a life worth living. That is how you survive the winter and make it to spring. And the children would fall asleep dreaming of cowboys and courage, of love that lasted lifetimes, of the promise that no matter how dark the winter, spring would come again, bringing with it hope and healing and the chance to start anew, just as it had for a desperate woman in a cabin and a kind cowboy who refused to let her face the cold alone, just as it did for Ophelia and Daniel, whose love story became the foundation for generations of family who knew the value of choosing each other every single day, no matter what winter brought.